Today we'll be changing the front brake discs and pads on a Peugeot 308 with a T9 body and a 1.6-liter 120 horsepower DV6 FC engine. It's not complicated at all. Let's get started. We've removed the wheel and we'll need a 10 mm socket wrench. Ideally, you'd want a star-shaped tool, but a 10 mm wrench works just fine. We've unscrewed 2 bolts. Now we're removing the caliper. The caliper comes off easily. We'll leave it here for now so it doesn't fall. We need to disconnect the brake hose retainers, one here and another here. It's not complicated, but we need to pull carefully to avoid damaging anything. Then we remove the caliper, and to keep it out of the way, we'll tie it with wire or something similar to the spring. The brake pads come off quite easily, and as you can see, they're in good condition with plenty of material left. Next, the bolt head is 18 mm and requires a bit of physical strength. It's quite difficult to unscrew without a breaker bar, and using one isn't very convenient. But really, the main thing is to get these bolts off. After that, it's just a matter of technique. Great, the bracket is off. Let's continue. We're removing this screw now. It's actually strange why it's here. On the other side, it's a star-shaped screw, and there are actually 2 of them, not just one. Oh well, with a simple motion, we unscrewed the bolt, and now we're moving on to removing the brake disc. Everything came off quite easily. Apparently, some kind soul had greased everything well at some point. As I mentioned before, never hit metal against metal. The build-up looks a bit scary. Yeah, the disc has 24 quarters mm left with a minimum of 24 mm. Let's just say it's on the edge, although it was still drivable. We're removing the guide pins from the caliper. They look worn out, but with a bit of work using a Dremel tool, they'll be as good as new. Don't forget to clean the caliper itself thoroughly. If you don't have a Dremel, a simple wire brush will do the job. Now, let's move on to the caliper bracket. Look, I managed to catch this issue just in time. You see this edge of the dust boot? It's not sitting right. If I'd kept driving like this for a few more months, it could have led to serious problems. I might have had to disassemble the entire caliper. It could have seized up due to moisture getting in. That's why it's important to do regular maintenance. Anyway, before the boot tears or gets damaged, I've applied a special lubricant for brake cylinders. This lubricant is safe for rubber and is compatible with brake fluid. From what I know, it actually dissolves in brake fluid. I've applied it all around the outside to ensure smooth operation. But that's just the technical stuff. The main thing is to get the lubricant under the boot, which is exactly what this grease is for. I then wiped off all the excess. On the outside, it does more harm than good. Now I need to press in the piston. I have a special homemade tool, but it's designed for twisting and pressing simultaneously. Luckily, I came up with a clever solution. In one of my old videos where I changed the clutch, I kept this bearing. It's perfect for this contraption and makes the job a real pleasure. I'm double checking how the boot works. Everything's great. We'll thoroughly degrease the piston teeth on the caliper, then apply a thin layer of anti-squeak paste, no thicker than 1 mm. We'll leave it for now and clean the hub with. Now let's talk about the brushes. After degreasing and dedusting, we apply a thin, even layer of copper grease. It's easier to do this with a spray, but as I mentioned before, there's no need to throw away your regular copper grease just for this. Let's take a look at our brake disc, which is from the TRV company. I've already discussed a similar disc in detail in previous videos, but that was for the rear brake. This front disc is made the same way. By the way, if you know whether this is an original or not, let me know in the comments. There's no hologram on the box, but it has good quality printing. Inside, the paperwork also has high quality printing. As for the disc itself, the markings appear to be made with dots, but everything is clearly visible. Also included in the kit are instructions and a moisture-absorbing packet. We'll degrease our disc and install its hub. For some reason, we only have 1 fixing screw instead of 2. After screwing it in, I decided to adjust it in a circular motion to prevent the disc from being skewed. If you have 2 screws, you won't need to do this adjustment. Now that the disc is installed perfectly straight, let's move on to the caliper bracket. There are guide pins, and at first glance, everything seems to work fine. But looking ahead, if you carefully remove them and replace the lubricant, they'll work much better, smoother, and as they should. It's hard to show this on camera, but you can clearly feel with your hands that while the old grease isn't exactly unsuitable, the new one performs significantly better. By the way, we're using a special lubricant for this. We'll apply some anti-squeal compound, then insert the guide pins and apply more anti-squeal to them. It's like making a sandwich, and we're preparing for brake pads from Remsa. I'm using these for the second time because I like them. They're not the cheapest, but this is their only downside. They work well, don't squeak. I'm not sure if that's their own merit or if it's due to anti-squeak paste. Nonetheless, they brake confidently, don't smell, everything's good with them. Overall, I can recommend them. The kit comes with 2 bolts for the guides, which I believe is to replace one of the original bolts with a hexagonal one, so in the future you won't have to rely on luck. And you won't need to unscrew it with a 10-star wrench like we did. We could have simply used a regular Rems hexagon wrench. Thanks for your consideration. The kit also includes these springs which need to be inserted into the pads. There aren't many options here, so don't mix them up. Let's move on. Take the bracket, take 2 bolts, apply copper grease and screw them in. First, 3 turns with a brush, then tighten by hand with a wrench, but with decent force. Well, that's almost everything. It's not very visible on camera, and to spare you, I'll fast forward. However, I didn't manage to insert the inner pad on the first try, just couldn't get it, it's visible behind the disc. But there aren't any major difficulties. The pads are installed, everything's lubricated, and if needed, we'll degrease the disc. We'll put the bracket back on, insert the screws, and replace one of them with the one that came in the kit. And of course, don't forget to reattach the brake hose, just as it was before. That's pretty much it. As I mentioned in one of the previous videos, for convenience, I've reset the mileage to 0 and I'll be tracking about 200 kilometers. During this time, I'll try to brake as smoothly as possible to allow the discs and pads to wear in properly against each other. That's all there is to it. Nothing more to add here. Thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.